Welcome. We're live with Bishop Jakes and Malcolm Gladwell for 30 minutes of a very, very fascinating conversation. Hashtag Instinct and Goliath, using your instincts to overcome your Goliath. We're here with number one best-selling authors, Malcolm Gladwell and Bishop T.D. Jakes live. I'm going to just get this going right now with Bishop Jakes, whose book, Instinct, is number one New York Times bestseller, 6 weeks running. And I just want to know what prompted you to write a book on instincts. Why this book and why now?
When I was inspired to write the book, it actually began in South Africa for me on a safari. But the principles that I saw in the safari are also relative to the many jungles that we live in today, whether they are political, whether they're social, religious, it doesn't matter. And I thought it was prudent to really discuss how much of success and the fulfilling of accomplishments on all levels, regardless of how you define success, are predicated on your instinctive ability to invest in the areas that you are instinctively endowed and to work from a place of an exposition of that internal influence that makes you able to legitimately produce those things that are organic inside of you and make them effective.
Wow, and my own Goliath right now is my brain because I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Patrick Henry Bass, the editorial projects director of Essence Magazine, and thrilled to be here with Malcolm Gladwell, whose fifth New York Times bestseller, number one, is David and Goliath. And Malcolm, what was the motivation for your latest work?
Well, the last book I wrote, Outliers, was an attempt to account for why people were successful. And when that book was finished, I realized there was all kinds of additional areas I wanted to explore. In particular, I was interested in the idea that much of what is powerful and strong in ourselves comes from adversity. It doesn't come from advantage. And that was something that I had touched on in Outliers, and I wanted to really go into detail with. And that's what this book's about, which is how it is the obstacles that we face that give us the greatest opportunities for learning. And how that happens and who that happens to is what David and Goliath is all about.
Well said. I would like for everyone who's joining this hangout, and you really are coming on board, just looking here, ask away with your questions. I'd like to throw a question out to both of our distinguished guests today, Bishop Jakes and Malcolm. Either one of you could take this first. Both of your new books depart from your earlier works. Bishop Jakes, that will be 29 previous books, and Malcolm, 4 other books. That's, of course, a natural evolution as writers. Discuss the progression of your current work. Malcolm, you touched on that a little bit, and the connection to some of your previous works.
Well, first of all, I had to write 29 books to match up with Malcolm's 4. So I'm still in the running there. All hell. But for me, it was not so much a departure from who I am, but it was a departure from the language in which I have approached my audience previously, because primarily I am known from a theological perspective and from a pastoral perspective. But because I have other interests as a business person and have interacted with some of Hollywood's top CEOs, as well as corporate officers, presidents, and heads of state around the world, I was hungry for a forum to have a broader discussion on a plethora of issues outside of just the faith realm, and to discuss how important it is to find your core and to work from a place of authenticity. And so I took the risk to see if I could broaden the discussion and enhance who I am theologically from a faith-based perspective by interjecting the components that people don't see, the machines, the underbelly, the underworking of things that cause them to be publicly effective are often developed in the way that they develop the infrastructure in their corporations, as well as the infrastructure in your own life. If you were to consider an organizational chart for the soul, what part of you do you want to be the most productive, and how do you direct your efforts and energies toward enhancing your God-given instincts, was something that I wanted to discuss, whether you're in corporate America or whether you're in a church or whether you're into politics. These are what I call transferable truths, and I took the risk to do so, and that risk has been affirmed by the response of people who found such value in the thoughts that I attempted to reflect.
Well, I love that, an organizational chart for your soul. And there's actually now an instinct workbook, if I'm not mistaken.
That's absolutely right, because after writing the book, which really introduces the concept and ideology, I realized that the next step for me in development could not be written by me alone. And so when I present the workbook is an opportunity for the reader to collaborate with me in the workbook, and to add those special things that are specific to your life, your gifts, and your talents, and how you plan to maximize those gifts. I couldn't write that without the reader. So the workbook is a continuation of that dialogue that I'm proud to add to the collection.
Right, thank you. And Malcolm, some critics were surprised at the choice of David and Goliath. Maybe they didn't read Outliers as closely, but talk about the natural progression in terms of your work over the past few years.
Well, my first book, Tipping Point, was an investigation of an idea and a theory, and a lot of that book was about dealing with how society responds to ideas and how information spreads throughout all of a group of people. This book, and I feel like ever since then my books have gotten more personal, and this book is the most personal of all. I'm not interested in grand theories about society. I'm interested in, I tell a series of stories of remarkable people and let their stories speak for themselves. And this is also a book where, for the first time, I talk about faith and take faith very seriously. Because I came to realize that if you're going to discuss the question of how people learn from adversity and how they find the courage to go up against giants, you can't leave out faith. I mean, to leave religion out of that discussion would be to completely miss an enormous part of why people where people find that kind of strength. And I've never talked about religious faith in any of my previous books. So this one is really it is quite a sharp departure from some of my previous work.
And your timing is impeccable. We have a question from Christ on Deliveries that's asking about faith and fear, which is one of the hugest dichotomies. So there's the thought that faith and fear cannot coexist. Is that so? First, Bishop Jakes, and then Malcolm, your thoughts on that question.
Well, I welcome the question. I certainly hope that they are collaborative, or if they're not, I'm probably going to explode. The reality is that faith and fear can cohabitate as long as we are clear about who's driving the car. If you don't, I think that a certain amount of fear, as I discussed in my book, is quite healthy. And generally in my world, we generally renounce anything related to fear from the perspective that God has not given us the spirit of fear. And while he has not given us the spirit of fear, a certain degree of fear activates our adrenaline, stimulates our sense of caution. Certainly it's important to have in business. To have a certain sense of fear makes you investigative, makes you thorough in your research, makes you check all the boxes that you need to check appropriately. And so I don't always see fear as the antithesis of faith. And I think it is important for us to understand that certain dimensions of fear are graciously added to our inventory so that we are aware of the other predators that exist in the jungles of our lives and the social constructs that we interact with, and to know how to deal with them. It doesn't always mean that we run from them, that we enter into flight because of them, but perhaps as Malcolm does so well in discussing, they may become the Goliath that we have to fight, but we can't fight what we don't sense. So I think that's important to have that, and I don't think that a certain degree of fear that activates your caution in business or in life is a negative, or nor does it negate the fact that you have the faith to press above the fear and continue in the process of being and doing who you are. One additional thing, I have never met anybody, I'm sure there exists out there, but I have never met anybody, whether they were a CEO or whether they were an actor or whether they were a president or whether they were a king, who didn't have moments of fear and internal conflict. And so the notion of feeling the fear and doing it anyway, when you step over the fear to do it anyway, that is faith. So and if there's nothing to step over, then faith is not necessary.
Well said. Malcolm, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I'd flip the question and say, what's courage? And I think courage is not the denial of fear. Courage is what happens when you learn through experience that your fears are not what you thought they were. And I have a chapter on a subject that I'm sure Bishop Jakes knows far more than I do, but a chapter about the civil rights movement in Birmingham, Alabama, and what some of the Martin Luther King and his group went through. And it's not that they knew must have been terrified when they got to Birmingham, but what happened is that over the course of that struggle, they came to learn that they were stronger than they thought they were, and their opponents were weaker than they had imagined. And it was a process of experience fueled by faith, in which we learn to put our fears in perspective. I think that's what courage is all about. It's all about understanding the true dimension of the things that previously terrified us.
Malcolm, you're great for pivoting into these questions from the Hangout. So, of course, biblically, there's always that moment, no matter what the chapter section of the Bible or whatever it is that you believe in, where an individual is alone and they hear a voice. And so there's a question: how do you distinguish between what is a promise from God and a personal desire in terms of your instinct?
Oh, wow. I'll let Bishop Jakes answer that question.
Thank you so much. You know, first of all, when we talk about promises from God as a Christian, we find those promises in Scripture. The fact that you have an urge, an inclination, or even an instinct doesn't make it a promise from God. God's promises are written, and they are sure, and they are absolute. And so I think that we can separate that immediately into a category by itself. And the other thing that I think that is important, when I start talking about instinct, I'm not talking about voices as much as I am understanding yourself, understanding how you have been warehoused by your God-given instincts with certain abilities and talents and gifts, and finding the area that you are most effective in being and in flowing out of those particular gifts and talents that are organic and instinctive to who you are as a person. I don't want to confuse that with any notions of intuition or word of knowledge or some other spiritual gift that you might think that you might have. I'm talking about what makes sea turtles crack through their shell and leave the sand and go toward the water. What is organic to you? What is natural to you? There's not a voice speaking to the turtle. There's an instinct that I work better here. And I think if we would move it out of the euphoric arena of voices and whether they be God's voice or your voice and all of that chaos, to what feels natural to you, what is organic to you, what in your life needs to move to put you in an environment that you are most effective. Because my book focuses on people who, like lions, may be raised in a cage that you are called to get out of, to go beyond what is familiar into that which is instinctive.
Very good. And Malcolm?
I'm sorry, Patrick, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, it was a question from the Hangout, and that is, how do you distinguish, when you hear a voice, whether that's God's promise or whether it's
I see. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't have much. I would be foolish to pretend I had a lot to add to what Bishop Jakes had to say on this, but I'm going to defer to him largely. But I would say that when in my book Blink, which I talk about instinct and snap judgments and things. What really impressed me in doing all of that work was that the value of experience in educating our instincts. That one of the things that you gain from becoming knowledgeable about a part of your life or a certain profession or domain of one of the things you learn is when your instincts are trustworthy and when they're not. In the absence of that kind of experience, we don't know. A 16-year-old's instincts behind the wheel are terrible, right? A 16-year-old should never trust his instincts when he's driving a car. But a 60-year-old person's instincts are fantastic because they've spent 45 years educating them. So it's important, I think, to understand the place you're in your life, and when you ask the question, are my instincts to be trusted?
Picking up on that, to both of you, do you think that successful leaders are more inclined to use instinct than the rest of the population?
I personally think that everybody uses their instincts every day. There's not a mother who had a child who hasn't used her instincts with a fever or sickness. There's not a salesman who hasn't used his instincts as to who is the decision maker in the home and how to close a particular issue. I don't think that you have to be rich or famous in order to be able to do that. In fact, I know people who are both rich and famous who are not instinctive and may be miserable. But what I'm focusing on when I start talking about instincts is being authentic to who you are and to your core, regardless to where your station is in life, and to enhance that station in life or transform that station in life by allowing your instincts a place at the conference table along with intellect and data and all of the peripheral information and all of the empirical data that is used to make decisions. I'm just saying, don't move your instincts away from the table. Allow it to also be collaborative in the decision-making process.
Very good. Malcolm, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I would say what great leaders have is a sense of balance. To sort of follow on what Bishop Jakes was saying, is that what they understand is when to trust instinct and when to run away from instinct. When is instinct dangerous? When is it useful? And because I don't think anyone would pretend that there's always one optimal way to make a decision. If you're buying a house, you make a decision in a very different way from choosing a life partner, right? I mean, you can't. We have to. What effective leaders know is the right way to approach any particular decision.
Right. So the topic of this Google Hangout is using your instinct to overcome your Goliath. So to each of you, we have 12 minutes, and it's very robust crowd here. Thank you both. But who has been your most recent Goliath, starting with Bishop Jakes?
Who has been my most recent Goliath? I think I live in a constant state of Goliaths. I don't think that I'm fully happy unless I'm charging at something that's bigger than me. I'm the kind of person who activates in a fight. And when you are a fighter, instinctively, you need a challenge, something that is worthy of your passion and worthy of your focus and worthy of your influence. To have something that challenges you every day is very, very important. And I am surrounded by Goliaths, and they are surrounded by God. So, I live in a sandwich, sort of, so to speak. I think that running a business and going into Hollywood was a Goliath for me. And it's, to borrow Malcolm's metaphor here, mine is really jungles. But to come into the Hollywood arena as a novice, as an outsider, and attempt to do business in an area that was so much bigger than me has certainly been a Goliath for me. Nonetheless, we produced 7 films in that atmosphere, and our last film, Heaven is for Real, is still skyrocketing, quadrupling its budget. Will everyone be that successful? I don't know. But I do know that we cannot. If you are a champion in your soul, you need a Goliath to validate that championship. And I think that the worst thing in the world is to be a champion inwardly and have nothing to throw your stones at outwardly.
Wow. And Malcolm, would you say that Goliath got a bad rap?
Well, in my the beginning of my book, David and Goliath, I retell the biblical story, pointing out that David has a close reading of that story suggests that David has many more advantages than when we understand at first blush, and that Goliath, we have been a little bit hard on him. Poor guy. He was up against someone who was a lot more mobile than he was, clearly a lot smarter, had changed the rules without telling him, had God in his heart, had a really, really dangerous weapon in his hand. I mean, I could go on. And there's even, I tell this very interesting speculation of many medical experts believe that Goliath had a condition called acromegaly, it's why he was so big. He might have had a tumor on his pituitary gland. But acromegaly has a common side effect, which is it causes problems with your vision. And if you read the story in Samuel of David and Goliath, it really does sound like Goliath can't see very well. He was a man with a lot of handicaps. And I think that's a really crucial lesson, though, that the very thing that made Goliath, if you just looked at Goliath, you thought he was this terrifying monster. But in fact, he had all kinds of hidden disadvantages that were a product of his size. He was slow and blind and arrogant. And I think we need to remember that sometimes we get overawed by these Goliaths, and we forget that they have many, many vulnerabilities. That, to me, is the powerful lesson of that story. There's that line in Samuel, the Lord looks on the heart. He doesn't get carried away with someone's size and strength.
Bishop Jakes, anything you'd like to add to that, to Malcolm's words?
I often think in moments like these of what went on several years ago. I think they're starting to rebound a little bit, but from blockbusters to Netflix, sometimes blockbusters had a franchise over a market, looked like their size was so big. Netflix was a fairly small company, and sometimes small gives you some agilities that you don't have. I think it is perspective and how you evaluate advantages and strengths. And I think that one of the points that Malcolm makes that so resonates with me, not so much theologically as it does with business, is that a lot of times you're terrified because you're outnumbered or you're outweighed or you're outfinanced by your opponent. But sometimes you have to look at the advantage of being small, whether you're a company or whether you're an individual or whether you're just trying to find a place to hide. And sometimes being small is a huge advantage. And so I challenge people who have overinflated sense of egos about themselves, that there are advantages in being small. And from a theological perspective, God said to Saul, when you were small in your own eyes, I could really use you. And to Malcolm's point, I think sometimes there is something to be said for the little guy, for the little company, for the little engine who could, for the little person who is both the writer and the director and the producer. Sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, and that necessity is often born out of the fact that we often see ourselves inferior in comparison to the stature of the opponent that we are coming against.
Well, we have about 6 minutes left. This is, I could go another 30 minutes, but hey, I'm only me. So both of you, in talking about your latest books, I hear a tinge of emotion. So starting with you, Malcolm, what has been the most rewarding part of writing David and Goliath for you personally, and also professionally as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was meeting. Each chapter in that book is a chapter about someone extraordinary, and I met in the course of writing that book a series of people who I will never forget. From the guy who cured childhood leukemia, who's still around in his 80s, this big, towering, disagreeable, angry, stubborn, brilliant genius who's still fighting, who's still tilting at windmills at his advanced age, to a woman whose daughter was murdered by this serial killer and who forgave the killer, confronted him and said, I forgive you. I could go on. There were numerous stories like that and I've never been so, in the course of writing a book, been so powerfully affected by these examples of courage in the face of adversity, or perhaps courage because of adversity. And I've never been as emotionally involved in a subject as I was in writing this book.
Thank you, Malcolm. And Bishop Jakes, for you and Instinct, what has
I,
been the
I,
most rewarding part of this book and this ongoing journey, which is now, as Malcolm would define it, a phenomenon?
Thank you, Patrick, for the opportunity. I think for me, if you sense a tinge of emotion in my heart and in my soul, is that you can only write from a place of your own experiences and your own opportunities. It was a bit of a faith walk for me to write Instinct, because I have a nice, neat compartment that allows me to discuss matters of faith openly and transparently, and have done so for a number of years. But because of who I am in the faith community, I've had a huge opportunities to interact with people outside of the faith community and gathered a plethora of worthwhile content and information for which the opportunities that I have as a clergyman do not allow me to totally unload. So this was a bit of a risk to expose what happens to a person who is down in Katrina, as I was, as they were searching for dead bodies and watching them come out of there, or who reached President Bush coming off the plane through one of America's worst crises of the era and time, or to have been in the room with President Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky story, and several other unique experiences that I had because I was a clergyman, but they produced content that doesn't fit within the context of a sermon or a message. And to take the risk of unmasking and unveiling and unearthing those treasures that occur when you are with people on death row, and when you are with presidents and kings making decisions, as well as small businesses starting up corporations, and to say, this is what I thought, and this is what I learned, and this is what I got. My sister says something about faith. She says Christianity is just one beggar telling another beggar where he got the bread. And so I think for me, to write Instinct is to tell people who may not have had as many opportunities where I found bread and what I thought and what I experienced, and to allow them to vicariously assume those experiences with me, and more importantly, to walk away with the opiate of wisdom and the nuggets of truth that are always dispatched from the places of these opportunities.
Wow. Well, you can catch Bishop Jakes at the Essence Festival on Friday, July 4th. They kill me, Bishop, if I didn't do this. And Instinct is also translated in Spanish, Instinto. So the message is going worldwide. With our final 30 seconds or more, any closing thoughts on Malcolm and Bishop Jakes? And I just want to say you both have been extraordinary and much, much more than we in this Google Hangout could have ever hoped for. But any final words or departing words, closing words?
I've had fun, and it was an incredible pleasure to be part of this with Bishop Jakes. And if I'm happy to ride his coattails for as long as I can.
Well, in the spirit of true confession, though I'm not really Catholic, but I will go into the booth today. I did take the title of your book, Tipping Point, and preach it all over the country. So we're helping each other along.
I love that.
Any other confessions here? I'm not a priest. Any other confessions?
It's a real joy for me.
Well, both David and Goliath and Instinct are in stores, and you can download them as well. And much success to both of you, and I hope that we can do this again.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Take care, Patrick. Thank you, Michael.